Today, the Antalya Diplomacy Forum is hosting the webinar entitled Nagorno Karabakh, New Opportunity Towards a Lasting Peace. I'm Ambassador Osman Yavuzalp. I will be happy to moderate the discussion on this important and timely topic. But before I turn to today's topic and over to our speakers, whom I'll introduce in a short while, let me say a few words regarding the Antalya Diplomacy Forum. The Antalya Diplomacy Forum, ADF as we call it, is a gathering of high-level professionals from various walks of life that deal with diplomacy. It presents an excellent platform to exchange ideas and address current international issues and challenges. I invite all our viewers to visit our website and to follow us on our social media accounts to explore our activities. The topic ADF has chosen to address today has been an issue at the forefront of the international agenda for the past several weeks. The so-called frozen conflict of Nagorno Karabakh is no more. There is a brand new reality on the ground. With the ceasefire holding so far in Karabağ, despite some incidents, and a significant change in the status quo of the past 30 years, now is the time to reflect about the future of the region and to explore new opportunities towards a possible lasting peace. In doing so, there are many questions which need to be addressed. Will the statement signed between Azerbaijan, Armenia, the Russian Federation be the first milestone towards peace that has eluded the region for so long? How can peacekeeping efforts be sustained? How can we ensure the return of internally displaced persons and refugees? How could the unblocking of economic and transport links contribute to the building and maintenance of peace? Could the linking of Nakhchivan with regions of Azerbaijan pave the way for a possible inclusive cooperation? And perhaps the overarching question, could all this be reconciled with the geopolitical realities on the ground? Today, we are lucky to have highly qualified guests to answer all these questions. They have been working on the Caucasus region for several years from different angles. You will find detailed information on the internet on their impressive background. However, let me briefly introduce them without going through any particular order. Our first speaker, Dr. Can Kasapoğlu, is the director of the Defense and Security Program at the Istanbul-based Center for Economics and Foreign Policy Studies. He holds a PhD from the Turkish War College and a Master of Science degree from the Turkish Military Academy. He was an Eisenhower Fellow at the NATO Defense College in Rome and a visiting scholar in the NATO Center of Excellence in Tallinn. Previously, Dr. Kasapoğlu held research posts at several think tanks in Germany, France, and Israel. He is one of Turkey's leading defense and security experts. We will be most interested to hear his assessment from a defense and security standpoint. Our second speaker, Dr. Dimitri Trenin, is a founding member of the Carnegie Moscow Center and has been its director since 2008. Prior to joining Carnegie in 1994, he had a long career in the Soviet and then the Russian military. He taught at the Military Institute in Moscow. He was the first non-NATO senior research fellow at the NATO Defense College in Rome. Dr. Trenin is an author of several books on Eurasian geopolitics. With such expertise, he may share with us the Russian perspective. Next, we have Ambassador Farid Shafiev, who is the chairman of the Center of Analysis of International Relations in Baku. Before his current occupation, he served as ambassador of Azerbaijan to the Czech Republic, and prior to that, as ambassador to Canada. Ambassador Shafiev is the author of numerous articles, op-eds, and research papers with particular focus on South Caucasus. We look forward to hearing from him how Baku views the future of the region. Last but not least, we have Ambassador Matthew Bryza, who's a US career diplomat. He was the former US mediator of the Nagorno Karabakh conflict. He served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and Director on the National Security Council staff at the White House for Eurasian energy security and US relations with Turkey and the Caucasus. He also served as the US ambassador to Azerbaijan. It would be interesting to hear his assessment from the US perspective, especially at a time when there's a new administration in Washington, almost in a very short while. So this short background summary of our speakers' expertise is a testimony to how much we may learn from them today. So let me welcome them once again and first turn to Dr. Can Kasapoğlu. Dr. Kasapoğlu, you have the floor.
Ambassador, thank you. And I'd like to extend special thanks to the Turkish Foreign Office and all the staff with Antalya Diplomacy Forum for assembling this very timely, very valuable event. Well, I'm gonna, as you introduced, mostly talk about the geopolitical drivers that can jeopardize this peace or ever wanted peace in the Caucasus. To do so, I'm going to ask one strategic question and look at two main drivers. The question here is, did Armenia give in? Did they accept the loss and the outcome of the war? And are they ready to focus on more humanitarian issues, resettling in the area and establishing an everlasting peace with Turkey, Azerbaijan, and drop their over their capacity, overstretching ambitions first? And the two drivers to shed light in this very strategic question is the military state of Armenia and the Russian peacekeeping contingent in the area of operations, with again a counterbalancer, Turkey's political military signature in the Caucasus, and particularly the future of Turkish-Azerbaijani military alliance. To put it in context, Armenia is a heavily militarized state that can catch the observers of this region really off guard if they are not into military affairs so much. It is almost a garrison state with 5% defense spending compared to its GDP, and thinking that with NATO, all this 2% threshold is making all the discussion within the North Atlantic Alliance. 5% GDP for an economy, shrinking economy like Armenia, is really something. It has one of the longest conscription durations in the region and also in the world, with a heavy mobilization of reserves also up to 15 years and even more, with accompanying paramilitaries like we see in Syria, in Iran, in the Middle Eastern part of the world. It is also a reality for Armenia, the accompanying paramilitary formations to the standing regular armed forces. On top of all being said, Armenia, despite its shrinking economy, its problematic economy, it is also investing in strategic weapon systems, not only defensive strategic weapon systems like the S-300s, but also offensive strategic weapon systems like the Iskander ballistic missiles. And at Turkey's very doorstep, at Azerbaijan's very doorstep, at the heart of the Caucasus, Armenia is like an arsenal of ballistic missiles. So to start, this is the tour d'horizon about Armenia and its military identity. Now let's quickly shift into what happened during the Second Nagorno Karabakh War and how the Armenians perceive what happened. Well, first we see three major trends that the Armenians faced during the war. The collapse of their doctrinal order of battle, because we have seen many Armenian units not withdrawing as a part of the operational plan, but withdrawing in an indisciplined fashion, completely disorganized, leaving unused, not even fired a bullet equipment to the Azerbaijani armed forces. This is a major military indicator. The withdrawal of an armed forces, whether it is a part of the maneuvering approach to the battlefield or it happens in an indisciplined, disorganized fashion. Secondly, we saw that the Armenian officer corps also dissolved in very critical places like Shusha. Some Armenian officers just denied their duties. They laid down their arms and left their positions, left their posts, and this was also something. And then right after war, we saw a major reshuffle in the Armenian armed forces. We have David Edgari Tonayan, the defense minister, resigned, and we have General Hakobyan, the general inspector of the armed forces, resigned. Well, these two resignations after a huge loss in the Second Karabakh War is really something that we should have a closer glance into. So the critical question is, did Armenia understand what happened? Have they grasped what was the Azerbaijani victory's foundations? Actually, they did not. Because from a military standpoint, we see that the Azerbaijanis won the war in first the electromagnetic spectrum and also as to their defense technological and industrial base. In a nutshell, it was like the clash of two different military paradigms, like the ones fought between bows and arrows and gunpowder, because we saw on the one hand the Armenian armed forces fighting in a 20th century military paradigm with a very Sovietic approach to the battlefield, and the Azerbaijanis on the other side were fighting with drone warfare, robotic warfare, having an information superiority and technological edge in the battlefield, and fighting with Western arms predominant as to drone warfare with the Turkish and Israeli arms. Well, the Armenians did not completely grasp it, and the fact that they didn't grasp it itself is dangerous for the future of peace and stability in the region, because after the war, we hear and read comments from the Armenians like developing dirty bombs and turning Azerbaijan into a wasteland, targeting Azerbaijan's critical national infrastructure, going unconventional, including terrorism. The lack of lessons learned from the war, and the real reason was Armenia's lack of defense technological and industrial base, is a problem. Although it is a wildcard problem, we have something more imminent, more tangible, and more dangerous, which is the Armenian strategic weapons arsenal, because that was the only thing that worked in the hands of Armenia. Really, it was the ballistic missile launches from the Armenian proper and also Nagorno Karabakh into Azerbaijan's population centers like Gence. And we know that another thing that makes it more complicated, that the Armenian strategic weapon systems mostly fall under the Russo-Armenian joint formation that was established back in 2016-2017 period. So it is really something that complicates the situation. As to the lessons learned from the war, one last thing that made the situation even more, say, complicated to grasp is that the Russians really got it right. When we look at the Russian writings about the outcome of the war from the Russian think tanks, they see that the Azerbaijani edge in defense technological and industrial base really made the difference, and resembling the Israeli-Arab wars of the Cold War, where people observed Western weaponry versus the Soviet weaponry, the Russians are really uneasy about the Azerbaijani success, especially Azerbaijani success against Armenia's Russian-made strategic weapon systems like the S-300s, and in one incident, the Azerbaijanis managed to hit a Scud launcher. That's also problematic. Well, lastly, apart from the Armenian military state, which remains problematic for the future of the peace and stability in the region, the Russian peacekeeping mission is another problem, or another factor that can raise the eyebrows. Well, we have almost 2,000 Russian troops, commanded by a 3-star general, with a chief of staff of a 2-star general in the area of operations, and from a military standpoint, is a mechanized formation supported by heavy fires. Well, that's too much for a peacekeeping force. Looking at the force generation pattern, we see the 15th Brigade of the Russian Armed Forces, which is their peacekeeping brigade, but we also see detachments from the Russian airborne troops, VDV, specifically the 31st Brigade. That's also another factor that can raise the eyebrows, because VDV, Russian airborne troops, are the president's strategic reserve, and they were their detachments, to be more precise, were the little green men in Ukraine, in Georgia, and also the commander of this peacekeeping formation, General Muradov, is the former head of Russian group of forces in Syria, and also his another task before coming to the Caucasus was with the Russian mission in Donbass. So this force generation pattern that the Russians choose for the peacekeeping mission in Karabakh itself is, I think, not very promising as to the future of the peace and stability in the region. Also, we can add other factors like the incorporation of Ministry of Emergencies, like the Russian intelligence, FSB, the patterns that the Russians are interacting and cooperating with the breakaway entity in Nagorno Karabakh, and also the air bridge. So far, we have a very high tempo of Russian transportation from the Russian principal to Karabakh. Within 3 days, we have detected more than 20 Ilyushin 76 flights. This means hundreds of tons of military equipment flowing into Nagorno Karabakh. And actually, one thing that I'd like to bring to your attention, so far, this air bridge is between the Russian proper, then the Yerevan airport, and taking a route through the land to Nagorno Karabakh. But we know that the Armenians and the Russians are also reorganizing the airport in Hankendi. So a direct air bridge from the Russian proper to the Nagorno Karabakh, actually Azerbaijani national territory, would be a problem. Last thing, and I'm going to stop here for the questions, the passportization of the local populace in Azerbaijani territory, now Armenian occupied and Russian peace kept. Indeed, a very complicated expression itself. The passportization of the local populace, as we saw the templates before, is really problematic. Turkey remains the one and only strategic counterbalancer and a real military ally, and the only military ally of Azerbaijan in this conundrum. So I know that I didn't paint, I didn't depict a very promising picture. I hope other speakers would do more optimistic than myself. But this is more or less the military situation. It connotes to the birth of a Russian protectorate in the Hudson right now.
Dr. Kasapoğlu, thank you very much for this extensive analysis of the military situation, or at least from the military standpoint. It is, of course, very important for us to know the military background on the ground to perhaps move on to the political assessments and also measure our expectations for a lasting peace, perhaps based on the military realities on the ground and the current positions of each party. Thank you again. And now I would like to turn and give the floor to Dr. Dimitri Trenin for his views on the situation. Dr. Trenin, you have the floor, sir. Dr. Trenin, I'm sorry, can you turn on your mic, please, sir?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. First of all, I'd like to thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Turkey and the Antalya Diplomacy Forum for this opportunity, for this invitation. Lasting peace can only rest on a political settlement, which is cemented by mutual reconciliation. As we all understand, at this point, we're very far from that in Nagorno Karabakh. And I think that the road to reconciliation will be very long and very rocky. However, a failure to achieve a lasting peace is fraught with the risk of a war of revenge. And I think that the previous speaker said something that should concern us all. No victory on the battlefield is assured until the defeated party has been satisfactorily accommodated. That was the lesson of the First World War. And that is the lesson that Armenia has had to learn more recently. And I think that this is something that the victorious party and their allies in Nagorno Karabakh today should think very hard about. My next point is that there's no peace in the area. We all know that. But there is a ceasefire, which is based on the trilateral agreement. Russia has stepped in as a guarantor. Russia essentially structures its peacekeeping force the way it believes is consistent with the agreement, but also consistent with its interests. Russia is in the region not because, or not only, and not solely because it wants the bloodshed to stop. Of course it does, but primarily because this region is situated very close to the Russian border, and any instability in Nagorno Karabakh or in the South Caucasus more broadly is fraught with a very serious danger to Russia's own interest. So I think it's up to the Russians to structure the force, and as long as that's as that's the reality. This is something that is also part of the reality, as many other things are. So far, the Russian intervention has worked, and Moscow finds itself in a unique position of not only being able to deploy a military force, a peacekeeping force to the region, but also it is acceptable, that force and Russia's participation in keeping the ceasefire has been acceptable to both parties. Probably that's the only party that realistically could step in and be accepted by both belligerents. The task at hand now is to consolidate the ceasefire on the ground, and this is what the peacekeeping force is doing. And I think that a light force, a force consisting of light armed men. We saw that in Yugoslavia in the 1990s. That force is no good. So you have to be present there in force. You have to be there resolute to keep the peace and fulfill your mission. I think the task is also to help things calm down on both sides, to work against the triumphalism in the victorious camp and the feeling of despair in the camp of those who were defeated in the war. And I think that the Russians are working on that through their many contacts with the Armenian officials in Yerevan, in Moscow. Of course, Russia is also staying in very close contact with Baku. I think it's unique that a country that is a military ally of one belligerent is also a partner of the other belligerent, and Russia cares about its relations with both Armenia and Azerbaijan. Going forward, the Armenia-Azeri dialogue needs to be revived. In the past, such dialogue created a basis for a final settlement. Unfortunately and tragically, prevailing popular and elite sentiments did not allow that basis to be translated into a settlement. That would have prevented the recent war and saved more than 5,000 lives. Many of them of young men born already in this century, a decade after the end of the First Karabakh War. Turkey, of course, is not party to the trilateral agreement that I've mentioned, but Turkey was key to ensuring Azerbaijan's victory. And Turkey's role is very much recognized in Russia. Due to its ties to Azerbaijan, Turkey is securely present now in the South Caucasus. Russia has had the wisdom to accept the reality of Turkey's role. Not everyone in Russia was very enthusiastic seeing Turkey do what it was doing recently, but the alternative was to contest Turkey's engagement and enter into a bitter and potentially dangerous rivalry with Turkey. That is not in the Russian interest. That is not in the Turkish interest, I'm sure. That's not in the interest of anyone in the South Caucasus region. Just today, speaking about his relations with President Erdogan, President Putin, during his annual press conference, which I think is still ongoing, said that he and President Erdogan not infrequently take opposite sides to various issues that they discuss, but eventually they work things out. And that is the attitude. That's not an analytical statement, but that's a statement of intent. That's a statement that describes President Putin's attitude toward dealing with Turkey. Russia and Turkey do compete, but they have learned to manage their competition, and they manage to collaborate where it suits their national interest. And I hope that it stays that way. There's no guarantee, but I very much hope that we will continue to manage relations in the South Caucasus and elsewhere in the Middle East, North Africa, and other parts of that region. And very lastly, the West, including the United States, was not much seen during the Second Karabakh War. However, the United States is clearly present in the South Caucasus due to its strong position in Georgia, its alliance via NATO and bilaterally with Turkey, multiple links with Azerbaijan, and the investment that the United States has made in Armenia. More to the point is the fact that the United States, alongside Russia and France, is the co-chair of the OSCE Minsk group. Turkey is also a member of that group. For a lasting peace in Nagorno Karabakh, the terms of that peace need to be supported by the world powers, and the Minsk group is both an important and influential subset of that of the international community, and it should not be ignored when we talk about lasting peace. For the time being, however, and this will be my final statement, it will be the Russian military presence in Nagorno Karabakh, which will both keep the ceasefire and make any resumption of hostilities a much more serious event, because that would include not only the belligerents on the ground, but Russian forces and all the consequences that are linked to that. So I hope it never comes to that, and I hope that the trilateral agreement will be the first, as you said, Mr. Ambassador, the first milestone on the road to lasting peace. But again, a lasting peace is only that kind of peace that's supported by the defeated party. Otherwise, you don't have a lasting peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Trenin, for this view from Moscow, and with a particular emphasis on, of course, the Russian presence on the ground after the ceasefire agreement. With that, I would now turn, of course, to Ambassador Shafiev. Ambassador, of course, we are very much interested in the view from Baku, because we have seen now a real game change on the ground. And of course, there is so much to be completed there, so much to be reconstructed, and life will need to go to normal over there in Nagorno Karabakh. So we would like to see, of course, to hear the view from Azerbaijan. And I would perhaps ask you, following a sentence from Dr. Trenin, he said that dialogue between Azerbaijan and Armenia must prevail. So what are your views on that? How do you see the future after a 30-year-old conflict has been brought to a new dimension? You have the floor, sir.
Well, thank you. I would like to thank Antalya Diplomat Forum for organizing this timely event. Because of the time constraint, I try to be brief and concise about the future vision, about the vision of peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I recently has written an op-ed for the national interest with the major arguments. Before speaking about the what's the future of the region after the 10th November agreement, it's actually not agreement, the statement. More precisely, its legal status as a statement. We should go back what happened of these 30 years since the beginning of the conflict, 32 years. When this conflict began in 1988, it was expansionist project. I don't want to go to the details, but it was the project of enhancing Armenia and uniting Nagorno Karabakh with Armenia. The slogan in Armenian language was Miatsum. And at that time, and quite interestingly, the Soviet authorities tended to support Azerbaijan because they didn't want to change the borders of the Soviet Union. But in the West, especially among the liberals, they saw this as an opportunity to challenge Soviet authorities. So they supported, they tended to support our Armenian side. And also, I believe strongly there was kind of traditional stereotype, Islamophobia, and that kind of the bias played a role, that we had the West supporting Armenia versus the Soviet authorities trying to preserve the Soviet status quo. But once the Soviet Union collapsed, the Moscow decided to support the traditional ally, Armenia, for for many reasons, political and strategic, and especially in 1992-93, to prevent Azerbaijan's westward kind of trend. And all these years, actually, the Russia was speaking about military base and the delivery of equipments and everything. So the policy of Russia was kind of to keep the state of limbo, especially after 94, the ceasefire, which was brokered by Russia. And the West tried to kind of to play a certain role, suggesting certain formulas when they came together as in the form of the Minsk group. But drawback of the Minsk group was 3 countries present in the Minsk group: United States, France, and Russia. They have a large Armenian diaspora, which I believe negatively affected the policy-making decision. So we had sometimes, for example, in the Washington, the experts and bureaucrats, in a good sense, who knew the situation on the ground. But when we had the politicians in the parliaments, which or in the Congress, speaking Parliament, France and Congress, which really looked at from the very myopic view. So, but what these 30 years they manifested, that the state of limbo or the desire to have this kind of policy divide and rule failed, and failed because there is still the international law, and not the perfect, but this is the international law which confirms the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan. And finally, Azerbaijan decided to move forward with the military solution, waiting for a long time. The future of peace, Mr. Trenin mentioned about the reconciliation, but I believe that before reconciliation, the future of the region should be rest on principles of international law, principles of territorial integrity. If I agree that somehow the Armenian sentiment should be also addressed as a defeated party, but we should come to certain legal ground, as it was after Second World War. The European countries, they decided that the territorial integrity of countries will be preserved, and then the question of ethnic minorities will be developed within that framework, within the minority rights. So that's, I believe, the same future for the South Caucasus. What unfortunately I see in a plethora of articles by the experts, they all focused on this geopolitical rivalry: Russia, Turkey, what's about the European Union, what's about the United States, and really little about what's about people on the ground, what the fate of the people in both in Armenian and Azerbaijan. So that's, I think, the missing in the picture. And I believe so the first step should be some sort of the clear legal framework, and territorial integrity is the cornerstone of the future security. The second, I would like to turn to what situation in Armenia right now. All these 30 years, they lived in sort of the mythology about they successfully expanding Armenia. They look at the map of 1918, when now during the occupation, they successfully expanded. Definitely after this defeat, I'm quoting Gerard Libaridian, ex-advisor to former Armenian President Levon Ter-Petrosyan, that Armenia should abandon the 22 years of policy of territorial claims. Also, I would like to quote the Russian expert Maxim Artemyev, who stresses that the ceasefire agreement opens the way for Armenia to revival, the opportunity to become a normal country without historical complexes, phobias, and myths. Now about the role of Russia and Turkey. Definitely there is some concerns about what Mr. Kasapoğlu said about the Russian peacekeeping missions. There is some rumors about handing passports, and we had some a few days ago the moments with the changing peacekeeping maps. But I believe it's also in Russian interest because that policy, state of limbo policy, failed. So I think it's in Russian interest, instead of creating something like what we have in Moldova, Georgia, or Ukraine, creating indeed different ground in the South Caucasus, because as indeed it's a unique situation that Moscow, I mean, yes, it has military alliance with Armenia, but also have constructive relationship, partnership with Baku. So for Moscow, it's opportunity to develop a relationship with both countries. And in order to do that, they indeed they should not undermine the role of peacekeeping by creating sort of the protectorate or something in Nagorno Karabakh. And as for Turkey, I think the Turkey also interested in, yes, Turkey supported Azerbaijan, and that support should be considered as a counterbalancing to the Russian role in the region, but also taking into account the, people focus now on the disagreements between Russia and Turkey in Libya and Syria. But on the other side, both countries, they came to certain consensus in Libya and Syria. And I believe the South Caucasus indeed represent in our the ground and the region where both countries can work towards the regional cooperation, because they both will benefit from the cooperation between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Of course, there are many things should be settled, and reconciliation, and the conflict is still fresh with wounds on both sides. And here I see the role of United States and European Union, especially with some concerns about the individual members like France. Instead of, to be concerned about this selfish geopolitical rivalry, I believe there is the opportunity for them to indeed to help two nations, Azerbaijan and Armenia, to reconcile. I mean, I'm speaking about, first of all, the European Union, with many humanitarian programs, educational programs, because so far European Union was, and myself, I was in Brussels last year, they didn't want to hear about Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, saying to me, sorry, I mean, we are not the player there. So now when the Turkey and Russia resolve somehow, they have sort of the jealousy. They want to have a role there, and they might have a role. And definitely the United States, even though quite recently America basically withdrew from the region, I believe Washington played a very constructive role in the 90s with all these energy projects. And the United States, of course, can return to be more active in the region with the constructive engagement with Turkey, with Russia, with Azerbaijan and Armenia. Thank you very much.
Ambassador Shafiev, thank you very much for those views. You have touched upon, of course, various aspects of this issue and how it's seen from Baku. Of course, there are several things that you said, but I think one of the most striking moments of your intervention was when you touched upon the views of the people on the ground. And I think beyond all geopolitical considerations, the most important thing is, of course, the views of the people on the ground, and of course, the lives which have been shattered for the past 30 years. But we will come to, of course, the Q&A session, and we will touch upon perhaps those issues furthermore. I would now like to turn to Ambassador Bryza, of course, to get not only the US view, but also perhaps the Western view in general. And also, of course, he may touch upon whether the Minsk group is still relevant, and if it is so, what additional role it can play, because you know that there are some doubts about the role of this group, but also the presence of the United States in the region. We know very well the US relations with Armenia. We also, of course, know the US relations with Azerbaijan, and certainly, sir, you are the most qualified person to talk about those relations. So if you can give us your views on those points, and of course on the way future, we would be most grateful. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, and thank you to the entire Antalya Diplomacy Forum. I've wanted to participate for a long time, and I'm really honored that I get to be on this panel, not only because this issue is so near and dear to my heart, but to be a co-panelist with these three brilliant gentlemen. I mean, I've learned so much from them, not just today, but throughout the years, reading and speaking with them. So thank you for that honor. Yeah, I'll start off maybe trying to paint the picture of how distortedly the U.S. government, or Washington, including the academic community, has viewed this conflict recently, as well as the agreement. And the reason for such distortion is that Azerbaijan lost the narrative back in 1988 about this conflict, not through its own fault, but because of the Armenian American diaspora. Nobody in the United States outside of the Armenian diaspora had ever heard of Nagorno Karabakh. I mean, Armenia and Azerbaijan were then constituent Soviet socialist republics. And so this was a very obscure issue that only was brought to people's attention, even once the fighting began, primarily by the Armenian diaspora, right? Who would say, yeah, my cousin is over there and you should pay attention, you people in the US government and the Congress, because this is a freedom fight. These are brave Armenians want to break free from the Soviet Union, even though that's not what was going on, but that's how it was played up. And so then once the war began, there was the, terrible things happened, whether it was Khojaly or Sumgait. The narrative was already interested, put it that way, more interested in the Armenian side. And of course, that Armenian diaspora is quite influential in the United States in a narrow band of subjects. And this is one, of course, in which they were really quite active. Because of that distorted narrative, the assumption during this Second Karabakh War in Washington, I mean, not only in the government among people who were paying attention, outside of the State Department experts, I'll say, but in the academic community as well, is that Azerbaijan was the aggressor. Azerbaijan was maybe encouraged to start this second war by Turkey, that it was Turkey driving this process, which I find insane. But I've heard this even from someone who's now an academic, whom I used to work with very closely when he was at the Pentagon, covering the South Caucasus, and I was either on the White House staff or at the State Department. He should know better. He should know what actually happened here. Azerbaijan was bringing the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh and the rest of the 7 surrounding Azerbaijani territories back into accordance with international law. It was using force as a tool of diplomacy, not as an end in itself, but as von Clausewitz taught us, as a means to reshape political reality, so that, as Dr. Trenin was saying, when the end of the war comes, the war is settled at the negotiating table. It's not settled on the battlefield. So Azerbaijan was carefully reshaping the political space using the new age military capabilities, the Turkish and Israeli drones, and the highly innovative Turkish tactics to achieve a breakthrough military victory that I think surprised even the top leaders in Azerbaijan. So Azerbaijan was in the driver's seat. And you mentioned Georgi Bryza just now, Ambassador Shafiev, who is one of the wisest observers you will ever meet for this part of the world. And so he has made the point that, yeah, it's time to move on. It's time to stop demonizing the Azerbaijani side. Armenia overplayed its hand. And Armenia gave up a land for peace formula that had been on the table for decades under the OSCE's Minsk group. So none of that is really understood in Washington. Instead, Azerbaijan is seen as having been the aggressor. Oh, Bryza also said, sorry, the great diplomatic achievement of Azerbaijan in recent years was to attract Turkey's full and active support in this Second Karabakh War. In my experience in the Minsk group in the past, sure, Turkey was very interested in the deliberations, but also understood that for historical reasons, Armenia was never going to accept it as a co-chair. So Turkey, we tried to keep Turkey informed, but anytime there was a flare-up in violence, usually the Turkish side would simply say, both parties should go back to the negotiating table and stop the violence. This was different. As Minister Çavuşoğlu said, as President Erdogan said, we, as Minister of Defense Akar said, we will offer Azerbaijan whatever it takes, essentially, to help them in this conflict. And it worked. Not boots on the ground, but the tactics and the technologies. So that's not understood in the United States, that Azerbaijan actually pulled Turkey along in a positive way, or encouraged Turkey, welcomed Turkey to come in. And then Turkey forms this important counterbalance to Russia. And a Russian peacekeeping force, I agree with Dr. Trenin, that needs to have more muscle than peacekeeping forces, especially in the Balkans in the 90s, we remember the horrible incident with the Dutch peacekeepers when they presided over the slaughter of so many people. So this is a tough peacekeeping operation. I mean, as we saw just a couple of days ago, right? The fighting, there are still Armenians out there, either troops or irregulars, who do not accept that the war is over or want it to keep going. And so there was a clash, right? That's not an easy diffusing operation for a peacekeeping force. So it has to have muscle, which is a strategic setback, maybe for NATO, but necessary. And hopefully we won't get into the situation as happened in Moldova and Georgia, where the Russian peacekeepers' roles became very controversial. But in Washington, still, people are thinking, oh my gosh, this statement of November 9/10 is a disaster. It was forced on Armenia by Russia and Turkey and Azerbaijan. So 3 countries that are not seen in positive light right now in Washington, at least Turkey and Russia are not. Not President Trump, but Secretary of State Pompeo has been on sort of the Emmanuel Macron train for the last several months in finding fault everywhere possible with Turkey, always being on the opposite side with Turkey, always on the same side as Turkey's foes, whether it be Greece or Cyprus or the Haftar Libyan National Army. And when Secretary Pompeo has visited the region, the Eastern Mediterranean, over the course of the several months, he's visited the Greek Cypriots in Nicosia. He's visited Athens. He did come to Istanbul finally, but he had no official meetings, as you well know, Mr. Ambassador. Didn't even make it to Ankara, and instead, the highlight of his visit was meeting with His All Holiness Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew to underscore Secretary Pompeo's personal, I think, dislike for the reopening of Hagia Sophia as a mosque. So there's an attitude in Washington whereby the deck is stacked against Azerbaijan and against Turkey. And this Turkey-Azerbaijan union has now gotten spun up in some notion that somehow Turkey colluded with Russia to force this agreement on the Armenian side. And then finally, the rhetoric that we heard from Pashinyan, as well as the leader of Nagorno Karabakh, about genocide, about ethnic cleansing being inevitable, that really has currency in many circles in Washington. I know the Dashnak Situn's branch in Washington, in the United States, the Armenian National Committee of America, they're the ones who blocked my confirmation for ambassador to Azerbaijan. These people are really adept at using these sort of human rights-based arguments to make anybody who opposes their argument look like they're denying something that was a human rights violation. And they're doing this largely to make money for themselves. It's largely about fundraising. So the reality that I see it is, this was actually an example where Azerbaijan showed unexpected, not only success on the battlefield, but restraint. Many people in Azerbaijan they're still disappointed that once the Azerbaijani forces regained Shusha, that they didn't continue all the way to Hankendi, Stepanakert, and then all the way into the rest of Nagorno Karabakh and regain all that territory by force. Those people didn't happen to be sitting on the front lines. They weren't involved in the absolutely brutal hand-to-hand combat in the forested ravines beneath Shusha. They were comfortably sitting in their homes or offices, wherever they were in Baku. But instead of playing to that populist desire for more fighting, the Azerbaijani government stopped. It realized the military phase of the war was over once Shusha was regained. It realized that maybe the most emotional, most important spot on the map in the whole zone of conflict for Azerbaijanis, Shusha, was back in Azerbaijan's control, and realized you could save hundreds, maybe thousands of lives, both military and civilian, by not pressing the fight forward in both Armenian and Azerbaijani. That restraint, that strategic restraint shown by the Azerbaijani side, is not yet appreciated in Washington. And finally, there are a set of other strategic gains for the transatlantic community that are not understood. First, I would argue that the settlement that is embodied in that statement is fair. It's just. The Armenian side doesn't like it, but it accords very closely with the so-called basic principles or Madrid principles that the OSCE Minsk group convinced then Armenian President Serge Sarkisyan and President Ilham Aliyev to agree to in January 2009. Now, there were elements, details of those basic principles that were never finalized. And I think that's because neither the leader of Azerbaijan or Armenia believed that his counterpart would be able to convince his population to accept these compromises. There needed to be a bigger push from I think, the Minsk Group co-chairs, heads of state. President Putin or President Medvedev, whoever it was, they were available, but my president and the French president was not. So that's where the Minsk Group failed. Where it succeeded, though, was drawing up this set of basic principles, which essentially, more or less, are the points in the November 9/10 agreement, with the absence of the possibility of a change in the legal status of Nagorno Karabakh. That last issue is going to come up again. The French foreign minister raised it right on November 10th. He said this needs to be negotiated. I think only the Minsk Group is going to be able to negotiate it, even though the French co-chair is so discredited because France tilted so much toward Armenia. But there is no other forum right now, and trying to come up with a new one that's mutually acceptable will be really difficult. But that issue will be delayed. For now, I hope the Armenian side, as it comes to grips with its colossal strategic defeat, will begin to realize the opportunities in this agreement, not just for the transatlantic community, but for it as well. So the biggest one is now with the 9th point, the final point of that agreement, saying all transportation links will be reopened. That means Armenia, Turkey, that means Armenia, Azerbaijan, and that means huge possibilities for infrastructure projects and all sorts of other cooperation in a regional sense that have passed Armenia by. So it's a fair settlement, which I think is going to more or less move the conflict out of another military phase, unless there's a huge Armenian buildup, and that's beyond any horizon I can see. It provides huge opportunity for Armenia to get reintegrated now into the region economically. From Washington's perspective, the road connection across Megri province of Armenia, that severely, in my last point, severely decreases Nakhchivan's dependence on Iran, which is a really big deal for Washington. And finally, last point, the Turkish peacekeepers. From Moscow's perspective, equal NATO. NATO has a presence on the ground in the South Caucasus, and Turkish troops are there for the first time in 100 years. That's something that is not appreciated in the right way in Washington or in Brussels. And I hope over time people will come to see things in full light. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. You have presented, of course, the Western, the US, and of course, the Minsk Group view based on your vast experience by working with all these institutions. Of course, from what you said that the Minsk Group failed, but that you also saw no other forum which might take this process further than the Minsk Group, if I got you correctly. I will stay with you because now I will move on to the Q&A session, and I will direct my first question to you. But before that, of course, from what you said, it's quite sad for us Turks that in the US and especially in academic circles, there are people, there's this perception of Turkey, and there's this perception of questioning Turkey's siding and solidarity with Azerbaijan, which is, of course, in our country, as you know very well, but perhaps for our viewers, that's important to stress. In our country, this is a given, and that's entirely natural that Turkey has displayed a solidarity with Azerbaijan and has sided with Azerbaijan. Of course, that goes without saying for us. But coming back to the Minsk Group, may I ask you? You said that, of course, you saw no other forum than the Minsk Group. But given the fact that, of course, the Minsk Group has been unsuccessful, if I may put so, for the past 30 years, and you also recognize this, you also acknowledge this, but also given the fact that one of the members of the Minsk Group, France namely, the National Assembly of France has voted to recognize Nagorno Karabakh, which is, of course, part and parcel of another fellow OSCE country, in this case, of course, Azerbaijan. And of course, the UN members, so as such, with unviolable borders. The French National Assembly has voted to recognize Nagorno Karabakh as a separate republic. Now, of course, the government may have distanced itself from this, but nevertheless, we're talking about this, the French National Assembly. So how do you think the Minsk group, and particularly France, will have any credibility with Azerbaijan, especially after such a resolution? I would kindly ask you, and of course, other speakers, for sake of a good management of time, and we have few time left, to limit your answer to, if possible, 2-3 minutes, if that is possible.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for the question, so I can clarify my points. I can see I was a bit confusing. Number one, I mentioned that France is tilted all the way toward Armenia, so it's hard to see how France could be considered an impartial mediator at all. So something's got to give there. Perhaps it's that the EU, European Commission, replaces France. I don't know. But the fact that Russia and the United States have worked so well in the Minsk group is something that should be preserved. And, you know, I was also the point person in the US government on Georgia. And I remember at a meeting or a lunch that Foreign Minister Lavrov had hosted for us co-chairs a month after the Russia-Georgia war. I left that, and we had many such meetings, I left that meeting thinking, oh my gosh, as misaligned as the US and Russia are on Georgia, we are equally aligned in agreement on Nagorno Karabakh. So that pattern of cooperation needs to be kept. Third point, I tried to say that there's only one issue. It's a narrow issue on which the Minsk group might be relevant in the future, not yet. And that is if the issue of the legal status of that part of Nagorno Karabakh, not under Azerbaijani control, ever comes back to be negotiated, which Armenia wants, which France wants, then the Minsk group may be the forum that, if it still exists, that can handle that task. Very last point is, I think the Minsk group succeeded hugely in January 2009, when the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan agreed to the framework for a settlement. But I think the Minsk group's failure was that it was never able to provide the political cover at the level of heads of state that would allow Aliyev and Sarkisyan, or Aliyev and Pashinyan earlier in Pashinyan's tender, to make these very politically unattractive compromises that were necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now turn to Dr. Kasapoğlu for a question. Now, of course, we are talking about working towards a possible lasting peace, or at least reconciliation between Azerbaijan and Armenia. But Dr. Kasapoğlu, from the analysis that you have given to us from a military standpoint, can the Armenian military forces ever be on a par again with Azerbaijan and therefore launch into perhaps another crazy military venture? Or have we seen a definitive shift of balance in favor of Azerbaijan from a military standpoint? Thank you.
Well, thank you for that question. That's really, really important to address. First of all, let's look at the military literature, not the one in Turkey, not the one in Azerbaijan. Let's forget about all the sentimental things revolving around the Azerbaijani victory. Just check what international strategic community is writing on Azerbaijan. At least I can right now just name a RUSI report, a Jamestown report, a CSIS report, and even today, penned by Uzi Rubin for the Israeli think tank BESA, about the Azerbaijani way of warfare and how it highlights, how it reflects the 21st century military zeitgeist. So I think it is, although many columnists after the 2016 clashes, the April War, tend to reduce the gap between Azerbaijan and Armenia into the simpler stance of defense economics, that Azerbaijan is richer and spend more money. Azerbaijan proved that it is not about that. Azerbaijan is not a Gulf Arab state, actually with lots of fortunes, spending on fancy toys, and just like deploying fancy toys into the battlefield. Azerbaijan demonstrated a competitive edge, a superior edge in the electromagnetic spectrum, in the informational sphere. We should also note that not only as to firepower, but Azerbaijani Ministry of Defense Twitter account worked as a 21st century information warfare asset, broadcasting footage directly coming from the battlefield from drones, actually. This is how the wars are fought in the 21st century. So if the Armenians, in their mind, have something that buying more weapons from Russia, fielding more firepower to Nagorno Karabakh, they're going to fail again. But this is the point, as I just mentioned in my speech, this is the point that we should be really, uneasy about, because two things loom large at this point. One is low probability, high impact scenario, which is the Armenian return to unconventional methods, return to terrorism, return to under the radar activities that can disrupt daily life in Azerbaijan and population centers. And second is strategic weapon systems, especially ballistic missile transfers from Russia to Armenia. And the Russians were really generous up until now about these kind of strategic weapon systems transfers to Armenia. When I look at the rhetoric of Armenian military leadership under the new military inspector and the new defense minister, I think, and as reference to Dr. Trenin, I think it is really obvious and alarmingly obvious that the Armenian military leadership did not concede and did not give in. They do not accept the outcome of the war. And for long term, I think this is dangerous. And this is a trend that we should monitor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kasapoğlu, for your answer. May I now turn to Ambassador Shafiev? Ambassador, the recent agreement, or rather the statement, as you correctly pointed out, includes a provision, I think, regarding the establishment of a transit corridor that connects Nakhchivan to Azerbaijan. Of course, this will connect Turkey to Central Asia and beyond. Do you see any hurdles in the implementation of this provision, and what is your assessment of the security issues regarding this corridor? And may I also add one additional question? President Aliyev offered a quote-unquote olive branch to Armenia when he said that Azerbaijan is ready to start fresh cooperation with Yerevan for the sake of lasting peace in the region. So what is, of course, and there's also a regional bloc proposal. Can you elaborate also on this mindset and tell us what would be the expectations? Thank you.
Yeah, actually, during my speech, I wanted to elaborate on this, but due to time constraint, I couldn't. So indeed, the provision contains about the railroad through Armenian territory between Nakhchivan and Azerbaijan. I think it opens up a big potential for generally expanding transportation network, because actually, during the Soviet time, Armenia had also a railroad to Iran through Nakhchivan. So it's not working right now, but potentially can be restored. So far, definitely, the conflict is fresh, and as I said, wounded fresh. We don't see positive remarks from Yerevan. More, it's now about revanchism. The current government is in a crisis, and the opposition parties even more radical, but definitely they should realize that their policy has failed. So probably we have to wait, despite the calls for regional cooperation from President Aliyev, also President Erdogan. Probably we should wait until the situation will settle. But as I said, there is the big prospect for all countries to benefit. Sometimes they're speaking that the Georgian railroad, which we build, will be less significant. We will construct through Nakhchivan. I don't believe. I believe there is also a role for Georgia to stay as a hub, energy hub, because the Armenia unfortunately lost that opportunity in the 90s to have the pipelines through its territory. But to the second question about the overall what will be with the regional cooperation, the platform, I just would like to recall in 90s, Süleyman Demirel, the late president, also spoke about the regional platform. I remember the European Union expert Emerson, Michael Emerson, I believe he also elaborating about this platform 3+3. In 2008, after crisis in Georgia, was also ideas about, yes, there are some constraints because the Georgian-Russian relations, again, that's why I'm speaking about the importance of certain legal framework as territorial integrity. But in the meantime, maybe we can move in different formats, like Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey, and then Turkey, Azerbaijan, Russia, Iran, Azerbaijan, Russia. We have, transportation project, and then in the future we will put together as we're putting the puzzle. Right now, with 6, 3+3 and +2, because I think the initial proposal was 3 Caucasian countries, 3 regional, Iran, Turkey, Russia, and then EU, United States, and China is also coming, whether somebody like it or not. But China also, increasingly has a role in Central Asia. But again, I'm speaking from the perspective of the people living right now in the region. People deprived, because the South Caucasus is more or less a landlocked countries. We don't have the access to the open sea. So this is the opportunity for people, which should be, I believe, supported somehow from maybe not we don't speak about the next month, next year, maybe that platform will be implemented, but in the future, probably. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answer. May I now turn to Dr. Dimitri Trenin for the last question, and perhaps to follow up on the question that I asked to Ambassador Shafiev, and perhaps to paraphrase it, to rephrase it. Dr. Trenin, what would be your view or the Russian view regarding this so-called six-nation regional bloc? And in your view, again, what would be the assessment or the reaction of the either current Armenian administration or perhaps the next Armenian administration, if there's ever a change in the administration? How would they view this? Thank you, sir. Excuse me, can you turn on your mic?
I'm sorry, I always forget that. Thank you. Russia has been, in principle, a supporter of connectivity. To Russia, the north-south connection via Azerbaijan and Iran to the Middle East and the Indian Ocean, if you link that to India. That's been an important issue. Russia has also suffered from the inability to have a direct connection, particularly railroad connection with Armenia, which is a member of the Russia-led Eurasian Economic Union, because of the problems that Russia has with Georgia. So all these things, I think, are very important for Russia. But clearly, as we know, there are political hurdles, geopolitical hurdles on the path of dealing with those issues. And I think it's very important that the statement that was signed during the night of November 9-10 did include this transportation clause, and Russia will be instrumental in ensuring that Turkey and Azerbaijan will have a connection via the territory of Armenia. This connection will be patrolled and actually kept safe by the Russians if that statement is actually implemented, which I hope it will. So it does present a chance, and I think that as Ambassador Shafiev very wisely suggested, collaborating at 6 may not always be the right approach or the most productive approach. There can be collaborations at 3, at 4, at 2. And the important thing is that we include the issue of prosperity and economic profit that would serve the interests of the common people in all the countries concerned, hopefully prevail over the wounds of the recent war and of other conflicts in the region.
Thank you very much, Dr. Trenin. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now, of course, reached the end of our webinar. And while the title of our webinar was, of course, working towards lasting peace, we are not naive enough to think that this will be a short endeavor. Will be a very long path. But we got from you, from different angles, very important assessments. I would like to thank once again, of course, our distinguished speakers, Dr. Can Kasapoğlu, Dr. Dimitri Trenin, Ambassador Farid Shafiev, and Ambassador Matthew Bryza for being with us today and for sharing their valuable expertise. We definitely would like to work with you again and hold webinars with you again. I would also like to express my gratitude to all our viewers who have joined us today. With a view to providing a good platform for exchanging ideas and seeking solutions for regional and global issues, the Antalya Diplomacy Forum will continue its online activities. So please follow us on our social media accounts for our upcoming online events. On behalf of the Antalya Diplomacy Forum, we send you our greetings. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Teşekkürler.